At the Rubido estate, Lady Wenti stormed into the halls, searching for her attendant, Art. Fury burned in her eyes. She had ordered him to slay a dragon, but he had failed her. Art knelt before her, apologizing profusely for the delay. Lady Wenny, however, dismissed his excuses. She had craved the delicacy of dragon meat, but her appetite was now ruined. Clan leader Lights, her father, appeared abruptly, drawn by the heated exchange. Lady Wenti turned to him, declaring with frustration that Art had failed her yet again. Angered, clan leader Lights berated Art, reminding him of his duty to protect and serve his daughter. Expressing his bitter disappointment, Art's shoulders sagged as despair overtook him. He began to question his worth, convinced his life was meaningless if he couldn't fulfill his master's wishes. Clan leader Lights, seeing his daughter's frustration, reassured her with a promise to procure a dragon himself. Art's vision blurred as the weight of his failure bore down on him. He opened his mouth to vow redemption, but exhaustion claimed him first, and he collapsed. As a child, Art had been adopted by the Rubido family, destined to serve as a retainer. Initially, he and Lady Wenti shared a warm camaraderie, but as years passed, her temper flared, and her demands on him grew relentless. Over time, she burdened him with every household task, including battling ferocious beasts. To keep up, Art even taught himself magic. Day after day, Art found himself drained, losing not only his strength, but also his sense of self. It was a grim fate for it all to end simply because he had pushed himself too far. After he fainted, clan leader Lutz decided Art's service was no longer needed, dismissing him without ceremony and forbidding him to take anything with him. Wandering aimlessly through the snow-laden forest, Art was lost, both in direction and purpose. His foot caught on a small stone hidden beneath the snow, sending him stumbling forward. His water flask fell, spilling its contents. Overwhelmed with despair, Art sank to the ground, too dispirited to continue. All he had ever wanted was to see Lady Wenti smile. But his misfortune deepened when a ravenous wolf emerged from the shadows. Its gaze locked onto him. The wolf lunged for him, but Art reflexively slashed its face with his dagger, leaving it unconscious. Just as he raised his blade to end its life, he heard faint whimpers nearby, the cries of wolf pups. In that moment, Art realized the wolf was merely a mother hunting to feed her young. His heart stirred with pity, and he chose to spare her life. Later, he hunted a boar and foraged mushrooms to prepare a modest evening meal. At dawn, Art arrived at the bustling adventurers guild known as Firen. The guild walls were lined with perilous quests, but Art, raised to serve, found himself drawn to the seemingly mundane task of doing laundry for the Isfil family. When he informed the guild receptionist of his decision, her expression darkened with concern. Around him, guild members erupted in protest, and warning him that the task was infamous. None who had tried before had succeeded. The uproar was interrupted as a figure stepped into the guild, a woman clad in imposing armor, carrying a massive bag. The room fell silent. Whispers spread quickly. This was Isfil, the Ice Princess, renowned for her noble lineage and her prowess as an adventurer. Without a word, Isfil set her heavy bag on the receptionist's desk, announcing it contained the spoils of her latest hunt, wild boars. The receptionist thanked her for the delivery, then mentioned that someone had come forward to handle the Isfil family's laundry. Curious, Isfil scanned the room until the receptionist pointed directly at Art. Isfil introduced herself as Isfil Urk, eldest daughter of the Isfil family. Art responded with a formal bow, vowing to serve her faithfully and fulfill her task to the best of his ability. As he spoke, he became painfully aware of the quiet that had fallen over the room. He had addressed her as if he were still a butler. Isfil regarded him for a moment before remarking that removing monster bloodstains from clothing was no simple feat. It often took an entire day to clean a single garment. Would he still attempt it? Art nodded without hesitation. Curious, she asked how long he would need. Confidently, Art replied that 1 hour would suffice. Her brows furrowed in mild annoyance at his arrogance, but with a resigned sigh, she allowed him the chance to prove himself. She led him to the sprawling estate of the Isfil family. At the gates, she left him in the care of Tet, the head butler, while she went to change. Tet introduced himself warmly, sharing that the Isfil family held a noble marquis title. Lady Urk had taken to adventuring as a way to uphold their proud traditions. Once Isfil departed, Tet escorted Art to a massive tub piled high with her stained and battle-worn clothes. a daunting challenge awaiting him. Ted explained that monster blood would ruin clothes after 3 days. Cleaning it required 3 people working an entire day for just one outfit. Art, however, assured Tet it wouldn't be an issue. Unexpectedly, Urk stepped out of the bath wearing an elegant gown, her appearance more feminine than ever. Art was left speechless. Urk teased him, asking if he was staring because she still had blood on her face. Flustered, Art quickly denied it. Urk laughed, calling him peculiar, and wished him luck with the laundry. Without delay, Art began pouring buckets of water into the tub, soaking all the clothes at once. Ted admired his efficient technique, and the maids offered their assistance, but Art confidently declined, insisting he could handle it alone. Art then used a unique form of magic to begin the laundry. Intrigued, Urk commented that she had never seen such magic before. Art explained that it was a spell he had invented to simplify daily chores. He called it his unique domestic magic. The clothes started cleaning themselves, quickly becoming spotless and ready to dry. Ted and the maids were astonished as the clothes came out gleaming white, fragrant, and as good as new. They could hardly believe monster blood-stained garments could look so pristine. Ted asked Art how he managed it. Art asked if they knew about slimes. He explained that slimes digest everything they touch, and his spell was modeled after that. Instead of digestive fluids, he used cleaning agents for safe and thorough cleansing. Tet was left speechless, while the maids showered Art with praise for his ingenious application of monster traits to laundry. Urk, impressed, admitted she had doubted him and apologized. She marveled at how effortlessly he handled a task that had always been a burden. Art humbly suggested she could seek his advice in the future, as he had many other useful ideas. Surprised by her polite tone, Art instinctively knelt and pledged to follow her orders faithfully. Urk realized Art had reverted to his butler role, and scolded herself for causing this reaction. She assured him she didn't fully understand his life, but she wanted to clarify that her next words were a request, not a command. Hearing the word request, Art felt a spark of joy. He remembered how Wenty always gave him strict orders, never offering him a choice. A request, however, allowed him the freedom to decide. Art smiled, telling Urk that if it was a request, he would gladly fulfill it. At that moment, he resolved to live by his own free will. The next morning, Art woke up to find Urk sitting on his bed, greeting him. Startled, he jumped up, shouting in surprise, and tried to figure out where he was. After calming down, he wondered why he was in bed, unable to recall what had happened. With a silly assumption forming in his mind, Art nervously asked Urk if he was in her room. She replied by asking if he remembered anything. Urk explained he had fainted after finishing the laundry, likely from overexertion. Embarrassed, Art hid his face with a pillow, unable to believe he'd worn himself out with magic. When Urk asked how he felt, he replied that he was fine and thanked her for her concern. Urk placed her hand on his forehead, saying he still looked pale and should rest. She added that Tet had prepared a reward for him. Suddenly, Tet entered with a chest filled with golden jewelry. Art was stunned by the lavish gift. Urk explained that the Isfil family could easily afford such generosity and asked if he had any plans. Art replied he didn't. Urk dressed him in fine clothes. Though hesitant, Art accepted after she reassured him they were simply servants' attire, as she intended to hire him. Art complimented her beauty and expressed his eagerness to serve her with joy. She patted his head, telling him to drop the formalities, as they were the same age. Art smiled and agreed. She then suggested they go out for dinner. On the way, Ted explained why Urk was called the Ice Princess. Many nobles despised commoners, but Urk could not stand such people and distanced herself from them. She empathized with common folk, valuing their struggles, which made her genuinely kind-hearted. Art remarked that Urk had a wonderful heart. During dinner, Art met Ramon Isfil, Urk's father and the head of the household. Art introduced himself, apologizing for fainting the previous day. Ramon reassured him, saying there was no need to worry, as he already knew. Urk noticed the dark circles under her father's eyes and urged him to see a doctor. Ramon refused, claiming he simply didn't sleep well in the estate's bed. Urk insisted it had been a long-standing issue, but Ramon brushed it off, saying worsening health was heaven's will. He admitted he missed the luxurious royal beds, which felt like sleeping on clouds. To everyone's surprise, Urk offered to recreate one for him. Art agreed it was possible, though the materials would differ slightly from the original. Tet and Urk whispered to each other, leaving Art wondering if he had said something wrong. Ted explained that royal beds required master craftsmen with decades of experience and at least a year to complete. Art admitted his former master once requested one, but he had dismissed it as impractical. Ramon offered Art 10,000 goldstones for the bed, shocking him with the enormous sum. Ramon added that completing the bed would be an extraordinary accomplishment deserving of such a reward. Urk earnestly pleaded with Art to help her father, framing it as a heartfelt request. Moved, Art agreed to assist and said he would begin by gathering blackbird feathers. Urk warned him of the dangers and offered to accompany him. In the Dorado forest, Art and Urk set traps to capture at least one blackbird. They hid in a tree and waited. Urk reminded him that blackbirds were formidable creatures and difficult to catch. Urk mentioned again how blackbird feathers were highly valued for crafting durable armor for adventurers. She noted that blackbirds were medium-sized, but incredibly tough to defeat. She offered to help Art hunt one. Just as Art was pondering the bird's absence, a sudden roar erupted from above, startling them. Their eyes darted upward to see a massive blackbird plunging toward them. "Get down!" Art shouted to Urk, vowing to handle the situation. Ignoring him, Urk charged at the creature, her massive sword aimed to strike. But the bird twisted midair, evading her attack and sending her stumbling with a powerful wing beat. The bird's beak opened wide, emitting a sharp, sizzling sound. Art realized it was preparing an acid attack and yelled for Urk to stay clear. Acting quickly, Art hurled his dagger, piercing the bird's neck. With precision, he cast Paralyze, freezing the bird midair. Drawing his sword, Art advanced without hesitation. In one decisive slash, he brought the creature down. Urk stared, stunned by Art's extraordinary swordsmanship. As the dust settled, Urk called to Art, and he checked on her. She brushed him off and demanded to know about his sword technique, marveling that she hadn't even seen the blade land. Art casually explained it was no big deal, just a paralysis spell. Urk's eyes widened as she exclaimed how rare and difficult it was to master. Surprised, Art admitted he thought it was common knowledge. He detailed how the spell worked, channeling a paralyzing current through a weapon once embedded in a target. Without hesitation, Urk began roughly carving up the bird, blood flying in all directions. Art, half laughing, asked if this explained why she was always covered in blood. Urk grinned and warned him not to tell anyone. Later, back at the estate, Urk cleaned up, before joining Art in the garden, where a tub filled with stiff, dirty black feathers awaited. Urk doubted they could be useful for a bed. "Trust me," Art said, and began casting magic. Under his spell, the black feathers transformed, soft and pristine white. He explained that young blackbird feathers were naturally soft, but hardened and darkened over time with grime. Impressed, Urk complimented his knowledge. Art revealed he'd studied blackbirds extensively because his former master once craved their meat. Tet chimed in, claiming Art's presence felt like fate. Together, they crafted a new bed and delivered it to Ramon. Overjoyed, the boy leapt on it, quickly falling into a peaceful sleep. Witnessing this, the maids eagerly asked Art to make beds for them too. Smiling, Art promised to craft one for each of them, earning cheers of excitement. Later, Tet questioned if Art worried about others exploiting his talents. Art shrugged, saying all he wanted was to make people happy. Urk vowed to protect his cheerful nature, making him blush. That evening, Art prepared for bed, but Urk caught his hand and led him to the balcony. Together, they gazed at the radiant, enchanting moon. Art shared that Urk's father had been sleeping better, earning her gratitude for making such a positive difference. Their conversation grew a little awkward, until Urk broke the silence, asking Art about his past. Though hesitant, Art appreciated her reassurance that she'd support him no matter what. Gathering his thoughts, he began recounting his time with the Rubedo family. He described how he'd worked tirelessly to meet their expectations, yet constantly fell short, leaving him burdened with guilt. Urk assured him that who he was now was more than enough. She admitted her disdain for her nickname, the Ice Princess. Despite her family's noble status, she confessed she cared little for their lofty title as marquises. Instead, her greatest wish was to make genuine friends. She shared a childhood memory of overhearing a friend's father, instructing his daughter to stay close to Urk for political advantage, as their family's lower rank as viscounts needed ties to higher nobility. Urk revealed how suffocating her noble status felt, like a curse. Nervously, she asked if Art despised nobles. He reassured her he didn't. Though the Rubedo family's rejection had hurt, meeting her and her father restored his faith in kind-hearted nobles. Urk laughed at his classic art logic before growing serious, swearing to never forgive the Roberto family, particularly Roberto Wenti, for exploiting him. The next day, Urk announced she'd be heading to the Adventurers Guild. Art offered to join her, but she encouraged him to rest after his hard work. With a smile there, they said their goodbyes and she departed. Meanwhile, Art overheard the maids complaining about pests destroying the vegetable garden. He volunteered to help, blending his laundry magic with a blessing spell infused with Ramon's fragrance. The result worked flawlessly, driving the pests away, leaving the maids delighted and deeply grateful. A striking young man appeared suddenly, his handsome features and confident demeanor capturing the attention of everyone present. He expressed admiration for those who could use blessings, leaving the maids in shock as they referred to him as Lord Fry. Mesmerized by his charm, the maids couldn't help but gossip about his looks. The head maid, ever composed, politely requested that he announce his visits beforehand so they could properly prepare meals. The chatter persisted until the head maid sternly reprimanded the maids, snapping them back to work. Introducing himself to Art, Lord Fry revealed he was Urk's brother. Art, surprised but gracious, greeted him warmly. With a gentle yet familiar gesture, Frey patted Art's head, mirroring Urk's actions from days before. He advised Art not to take things too seriously, and began speaking fondly about Urk's care for him. Finally, he extended his hand for a handshake, but Frey's grip tightened unexpectedly. His eyes sparkled with determination as he challenged Art to a duel. Art was stunned, confused by this sudden turn of events. He noticed Frey's hand was cold as ice, and hesitantly asked why he wanted to duel. Frey smirked, questioning whether Art was truly strong and urging him to prepare for battle. Art remained bewildered, but Frey explained that his nomadic lifestyle might have dulled his skills. But what better way to sharpen my blade than to face you, Frey declared, adding with a mischievous grin that winning would earn him big brother points. Intrigued and determined, Art agreed, stating, "If it helps you, I'm ready." The stage was set for an epic confrontation. The duel began with Frey launching a swift, precise strike, which Art dodged effortlessly. Impressed, Frey acknowledged Art's strength. Internally, Art was alarmed, comparing Frey's strike to the force of a cannonball. It was a wake-up call. This was no ordinary spar. Frey increased his speed, each attack more ferocious than the last, yet Art remained untouchable, his skill exceeding Frey's expectations. Not a single blow landed. Frey pushed on, refusing to yield. He fought not just for pride, but to uphold the honor of the Isviel family. Weakness was not an option. If he faltered, rival families might exploit the Isviel clan. As the eldest son, Frey bore the responsibility of protecting his family, their reputation, and Urk. With renewed determination, Frey decided to unleash his full power. Art encouraged him, urging him not to hold back. Their duel escalated into a breathtaking display of skill and power. Each strike resonated with purpose, testing the limits of their abilities. Observing from the window, Frey's father watched with intrigue. His son, who had returned unannounced, was wielding the Isviel family's secret magic. Frey invoked blessing magic, creating a colossal block of ice by manipulating the air itself. The ice shimmered ominously, a testament to Frey's prowess as the heir to the Isviel lineage. But Art shattered the icy prison with a dazzling display of raw power. Frey was astonished, eager to know how Art escaped so effortlessly. Smiling humbly, Art downplayed his feat, saying it was nothing special. The truth was far from simple. Art had employed an advanced spell called friction, heating his blade to melt the ice. This was no ordinary technique. It was mastery at its peak. Even Frey's father marveled at Art's ingenuity. Frey began to understand why Urk admired Art, yet Art clarified that he wasn't seeking praise. He simply wanted to be helpful while pursuing his own goal. Frey wanted to be a big brother worth admiring, while Art aimed to settle his debts. Their motivations clashed in a battle of honor and ambition. Frey was overwhelmed by Art's immense power and flawless technique. He couldn't believe Art had been holding back. "You're not even trying, are you?" Frey exclaimed, astonished. Determined, he prepared to reveal a secret weapon. In a stunning transformation, Frey became a giant wolf, a primal beast from the age of gods and titans. This great wolf radiated destructive energy, its jaws capable of tearing the earth apart. Frey, consumed by this ancient power, charged at Art with untamed ferocity. It was as if legends had come to life. The duel transcended mere combat, becoming a clash of mythic proportions. With unwavering focus, Art executed a legendary move. He channeled his entire being, pushing beyond human limits. This technique, an ancient art of creation, was something Art had uncovered in the royal archives and perfected through relentless practice. Yet even this incredible power came at a cost. Art's sword shattered under the strain, reminding him that perfection was still out of reach. A victor emerged, Art, but he remained humble, crediting his magic for the win. Frey reassured him, admiring Art's noble choice to aim for his blade instead of causing harm. At that moment, Ted arrived, greeting both men warmly. It had been some time since he had seen Frey and noticed the signs of their duel. Frey introduced himself formally as the first chair of the Royal Academy of Magic Knights and vice captain of the Royal Knights, Usfield Frey. This revelation left Art reflecting on the duel's significance. It was not just a battle, but a test of character for both of them. Meanwhile, at the Rubito estate, the princess was wreaking havoc as usual. Her new servant failed to meet her expectations, frustrating her endlessly. She found herself longing for Art, regretting her father's decision to dismiss him. Her father entered, announcing his intention to fire the current servant, the 10th dismissal so far. He asked if she truly found them all inadequate. The princess confirmed her dissatisfaction, expressing her wish for Art's return. Her father admitted that no one could replace Art and reminded her of the upcoming royal ball. He hinted that Wenny's father would be pleased if she married soon. The princess gazed at the dress Art had sewn for her, murmuring that the rest was up to him. Frey returned home, calling out his arrival, but Urk didn't acknowledge him. Instead, she stepped outside to meet Art, completely ignoring her brother's presence. Art found their relationship odd. Frey kept his composure and asked Art about his plans for the day. Urk explained she had gathered herbs for an orphanage, making Art feel inadequate. Art praised Urk's kindness and helpfulness, contrasting it with his own shortcomings. Urk dismissed his self-criticism, reminding him of his contributions, like helping with laundry and building her father's bed. Art felt a spark of encouragement. Frey, however, felt a pang of jealousy watching them. Urk reassured Art to take things step by step, promising they'd tackle tasks together. Unable to contain himself, Frey challenged Art to another duel. Art was taken aback, exclaiming, "Another match already?" Urk questioned whether Frey had pressured Art in the previous duel. Frey denied it, but failed to calm her down. Urk bluntly told her brother she hated him, crushing Frey's spirit. He collapsed, dramatically lamenting that his world had ended. Their father appeared, asking about the commotion. Frey informed his father of Urk's words. Their father advised him to apologize, though Frey couldn't understand why she disliked him. Shifting the focus, their father asked why Frey had returned home. Frey revealed he brought a message about a significant event. Art asked about it, but Frey's father brushed it aside, inquiring about the royal ball preparations instead. The royal ball was a crucial social event for nobles. Urk expressed her disinterest, but admitted she had to attend, as the Duke had requested her presence. Frey mentioned he was too busy to attend, and Tet also excused himself. No one from the Isfil family could represent them, creating a dilemma. Urk declared she'd only go if Art accompanied her. Tet approved of the idea, suggesting Art serve as her bodyguard and Frey's representative. A perfect solution. Tet formally asked Art to take on this role. Art gladly accepted, happy to be of use to Urk. Urk was touched by his willingness to help. She decided to prepare a new dress and went for a fitting. Her maid noted she had grown taller, which displeased her. Urk suddenly thought of Art. When the maid mentioned adjusting the dress's bust, Urk blushed. The maid joked about asking Art to help, but Urk rejected the idea, flustered. She firmly told the maid to stop teasing her.
And meanwhile, Frey's father addressed the earlier dismissed event, the looming Eclipse Locust disaster. Frey regretted mentioning it at an awkward time, but was glad he brought it up now. These locusts, a monstrous plague, devoured everything in their path, reducing villages and farmlands to ruin.
Frey revealed the royal knights had warned him this calamity would strike again. The locust swarms were relentless, having already ravaged Pal, and their next target was unknown. Frey felt the weight of this knowledge, determined to aid preparations for the kingdom's defense. Frey's father, a friend of Pal's lord, shifted the conversation to Art. Frey described Art as a kind, sincere prodigy, rare in a millennium. Art's resilience through harsh circumstances had been a blessing for the family. Even his craftsmanship, like the bed he made, was exceptional. Frey's father decided to oversee the locust threat himself, but tasked Tet with investigating the Rubedo family. Tet shared dark rumors about the Rubedosit, alleging their wealth came from illicit or dangerous sources. The day of the ball arrived. Urk donned an elegant gown, though reluctant to attend. Art joined her in the carriage, complimenting her appearance. Urk dismissed the flattery, but admitted the dress felt tight. Art stood by his compliment, vowing to protect her honor no matter what. With unwavering resolve, he declared he would no longer be controlled by others. Fate now held their future. Urk used an enchanted perfume to calm her nerves. Art asked if it helped and offered to escort her, which she accepted with a smile. As they entered the grand hall, all eyes fell on Urk's radiant beauty. While Art was more reserved, his presence was equally striking. Urk spotted someone she'd hoped to avoid. Art reassured her, promising to stay by her side. The lively sound of violins accompanied their walk through the corridors. Art politely asked Urk to dance with him. She agreed, and they began moving gracefully across the floor. Suddenly, a woman recognized Art and rushed to embrace him, leaving him stunned. Politely, he asked her to let go. The woman, overjoyed, exclaimed they'd finally reunited. Art realized she was Princess Leah, who announced to the crowd that Art had once saved her from a dragon. Her declaration stirred murmurs about Art's identity and heroism. Leah's excitement overshadowed Urk, who reminded her of her presence. Leah apologized, laughing nervously. Urk asked why Art never mentioned Leah. Before he could answer, Leah suggested they discuss it in private. Meanwhile, Lady Wenti arrived in a dazzling dress that turned heads. Despite her entrance, the spotlight remained on Princess Leah. Undeterred, Wenti flaunted the dress Art had crafted, calling it a masterpiece. Unexpectedly, Wenti inquired about her future fiancé. Her father revealed his identity, Freeman de Gaulle. Wenti was horrified, exclaiming it must be a joke. She found him utterly repulsive. Her father tried to downplay her outburst, explaining she was joking about food, not her fiancé. Still, he insisted she meet Freeman in the kitchen. One look at him, and Wenti fled the scene. Her father's voice called after her, filled with regret for his matchmaking decision. Meanwhile, Urk, Art, and Princess Leah found a quiet corner. Urk asked how Leah and Art knew each other. Art began explaining his time in the royal capital, but Leah eagerly interrupted, praising Art for his bravery in slaying the dragon. Urk felt a pang of disappointment, realizing Art's kindness wasn't reserved just for her. Leah then asked if the gift she'd sent had been useful, sparking Urk's curiosity. Urk's curiosity was piqued by Leah's words. Leah revealed that she had sent Art a large sum of gold bars from the royal treasury. She asked if he'd received it, but Art apologized, admitting he didn't recall such a gift. Leah reassured him that it was fine and offered to send another one. Then, Leah asked why Urk and Art had come to the ball together, hiding the jealousy in her voice. It became clear that Princess Leah harbored deep feelings for Art, although he remained oblivious. Love could truly blind one's judgment. And then, Leah made a bold suggestion. "Hey, Art, why don't you visit my place after the ball? I'd be thrilled to host you," she offered. But Urk had had enough. "Absolutely not," she declared. "Art is my loyal attendant. He serves me, and that's final." The two noble women instantly launched into a fiery argument. Princess Leah wasn't one to give up easily. She argued that Art would be happier with her, but Urk stood firm. "Hold on. That's for Art to decide. He belongs where he chooses." And so, the tug of war continued. Meanwhile, Lady Wenti was enduring the worst nightmare of her life. She wanted to scream, "No, no, this can't be happening." She refused to be bound to a man she found so utterly unappealing. "I'd rather die than be stuck with him," she exclaimed. But here's the twist. Deep down, Lady Wenti knew things would be better if Art were there. Yes, a surprising, humorous moment. As Urk and Princess Leah fought over Art, they each clung to one of his arms, each staking her claim over the young man. Amidst the chaos, Lady Wenti suddenly spotted them. What would Art do in this awkward situation? In that moment, Lady Wenti recalled the times Art had served her when they were younger. When others had harshly criticized her, Art was always there, offering comfort. Despite her angry demands for retribution, Art had calmly reassured her that she wasn't defined by those cruel words, reminding her that she was a good person. However, over time, Lady Wenti had become spoiled by her father's indulgence and the people around her. Now, With her father preventing her from causing a scene over her arranged marriage, she couldn't accept it, and realized how kind Art had been to her. Suddenly, Wenti approached, demanding that Art return as her butler. With a mocking tone, she asked if he had quit and ordered him to come back with her as if nothing had changed. Art began to lose control, slipping into his old habit of obedience, unable to resist her commands. His past conditioning left him powerless against her orders. However, quickly intervened, insisting that Art had the right to choose for himself and shouldn't be forced to return if he didn't want to. She noticed his confusion, realizing he couldn't respond naturally when he returned to her rude tone, asking who she was. But when she realized was the Ice Princess, Wenti quickly apologized for her rudeness. Still, she remained determined to drag Art back into her service. Stood her ground, refusing to let Art return to a life of oppression under the Rubido family. Wenti grudgingly conceded that Art should decide for himself, but was concerned as she saw his inner struggle, torn between his ties to the Isfil family and the fear of angering Wenti. Princess Leah, observing the scene, understood Art's dilemma. She explained to the psychological conditioning Art had undergone. "It's like a chick," Leah explained, "a young bird that imprints on the first person it sees as its parent." Art had grown up serving the Rubido family, and his mind still responded to Wenti's absolute commands, even after he was dismissed. Urk's worry deepened, knowing that if Art returned to Wenti, he would once again face abuse and be unable to speak up for himself. Princess Leah began questioning why Art hadn't received the gold she had sent after he saved her. When Leah asked Wenti about it, Wenti feigned ignorance, blaming her father. Secretly, Wenti ordered Art to lie about receiving the gift, and Art, fearful of displeasing her, complied. Though he lied to keep the peace, Art felt crushed under the weight of Wenti's pressure. A smug smile spread across Wenti's face. As they prepared to leave, reminded Art once again that he had the right to make his own decisions and should not let others control him. She reminded him of all the good he had done for the Isfil family, like curing her father's insomnia by crafting a royal quality bed. Art now faced a difficult choice: return to a life of submission under Wenti, or stand up for himself and continue his path of freedom with the Isfil family. Reminded him of his promise to stay by her side, but now she wanted to stay by his. She asked Art to face her truthfully and not lie. Her words touched Art's heart, causing his instinct to serve Wenti to fade. He realized that if he left with Wenti, he would hurt and the Isfil family, who had shown him kindness. His decision was clear. He couldn't bear to see suffer. As Art pondered over everything, reassured him, telling him it was okay not to face everything alone. She insisted she wanted to help him. Her words struck Art deeply, making him realize how his life had always been bound by obedience, never allowing him to make his own choices. Before came into his life, Art had known nothing but obedience and had never experienced true freedom. And the Isfils taught him that he had the right to choose, never commanding him but simply asking for his help. Now, Art saw the harm he had caused and the Isfils. Filled with self-disappointment, he no longer wanted to remain a servant. When begged him not to lie to her, Art understood that following Wenti meant deceiving himself. He couldn't allow that. Art made up his mind to free himself from Wenti's influence and, for the first time, act on his own will. He apologized to Princess Leah for lying under Wenti's orders, admitting that he had no knowledge of the gift she sent, as he had never been informed or seen it. Wenti, sensing her control slipping, was stunned that Art was defying her. Art stood tall against Wenti, declaring that he was no longer her servant, as her father had dismissed him. He declared himself attendant, serving the Isfil family and no longer belonging to the Rubido household. Desperate, Wenti tried to deny the truth, commanding Art to return to her service, but intervened swiftly. She warned Wenti that if she attempted to force Art, would protect him. Wenti, realizing she couldn't change the situation or reclaim Art, was left with nothing. At last, Princess Leah shifted her attention to another matter: the improper use of the kingdom's gift meant for Art. She declared that Wenti and the Rubido family would be punished immediately. Wenti, still reeling from her loss of Art, was now confronted with a royal retribution for their cruelty. It was justly deserved.
But as the princess announced the kingdom's judgment, Wenti's father Rubido fled the kingdom to escape punishment, along with the family he had arranged for Wenti to marry into. The kingdom immediately issued a search order, knowing they wouldn't get far.
With no other option, Wenti followed her father's lead, leaving the ballroom. Her eyes burned with hatred as she warned Art to remember this moment. As she walked away, a piece of the dress Art had made for her ripped, each step turning into a journey of humiliation. The journey continued as Art and Urk reveled in their reunion. Urk welcomed him back with open arms, vowing to always protect and support him. They lost track of time, even forgetting Princess Leah's presence. Jokingly, Urk claimed that she had done most of the work and deserved some recognition and affection too. The two women resumed their playful rivalry over who deserved Art's loyalty, but Art firmly declared himself Urk's butler, putting an end to the competition. Still, Leah wasn't ready to surrender. Urk called Leah's actions a nuisance to Art. The argument, which should have ended quickly, dragged on until someone else stepped in. Urk's joy was interrupted by a messenger, who had been searching for the princess and Art. Relieved to find them, he whispered to Urk that disaster was approaching. The messenger warned that a massive swarm of black batters was heading toward the kingdom. These creatures instilled terror in all who heard their name, for they brought famine, drought, and destruction. The black batters devoured crops, resources, and precious materials cultivated by the people. The city trembled in fear, and the looming disaster cast a dark shadow over the princess and Lady Urk. The mood shifted dramatically. What had been a moment of celebration after Art's liberation now turned heavy with the weight of the approaching calamity. The terrifying part was that neither the kingdom nor its people knew how to stop it or lessen the damage it would cause. The only option was to try and control the damage the swarm would bring. A gathering of key figures, including Princess Leah, Lady Urk, the monster hunter Ice Lady, and Lady Urk, was called. Everyone turned to Art, hoping he might have a brilliant plan to save the kingdom. Driven by his desire to bring happiness to others, the guild would need to step in to handle the disaster. Urk introduced Art to the guildmaster, Mr. Peters, who was trusted to find a solution, as he always had in the past. Wanting to live up to Urk's expectations, Art prepared to offer something valuable. Mr. Peters began with formalities, then quickly focused on the main issue. They needed a defense against the black batters. It was known that these creatures had once invaded from an agricultural nation, causing widespread destruction, starvation, and relentless death. Their insatiable hunger brought famine, devouring everything in their path. Despite being well known, only a few facts about them had been documented. 20 years ago, the first wave of black batters appeared, numbering in the hundreds of millions. With hard shells, they were nearly impossible to kill or deter, and their endless hunger kept their numbers growing. Art was somewhat familiar with them, having read about them in the royal archives. He knew a swarm could number anywhere from 100 million to a billion. But this time, Guildmaster Peters grimly revealed the worst news. The swarm could reach an unprecedented 500 billion, vastly larger and more dangerous than ever before. When Art imagined the destruction such a number could cause, he shuddered. The room fell silent as everyone processed the gravity of the situation. Entire cities had already been obliterated, with Onyx next in line. Pearl and Garnet had been ravaged beyond recognition. A council member asked if the special ones had appeared. They referred to the pure queen batters, a deadly breed, far more dangerous than regular black batters. These white pure queen batters possessed terrifying power, capable of wiping out entire nations. They were considered an S-class threat due to the sheer devastation they could cause. The guildmaster confirmed that the pure queen batters were indeed advancing, and the prospect of facing them alongside the black batters struck fear into everyone. The attack was shaping up to be the kingdom's most catastrophic disaster since its founding. With limited time, Guildmaster Peters called for a meeting to brainstorm ways to slow or stop the black batters before they reached the city. He knew if the swarm continued on its current path, the capital, Dread, would be the next target. The swarm would arrive in a week, leaving only that short time to prepare. Lady Urk, with her adventure experience, knew a week wouldn't be enough to gather a large enough force, especially with the pure queen batters involved. Facing a dire situation with no clear solution, Art presented his plan, raising hopes. He suggested a way to buy time to gather enough defenses. However, Guildmaster Peters dismissed him, deeming the meeting not a place for a child's ideas. Urk and her father, knowing Art's extraordinary abilities, defended him, insisting Mr. Peters at least hear him out, given his remarkable track record. Art proposed using lemon water, the remedy he once used for a sore throat, magically enhanced to turn into an insect repellent. This solution could keep the black batters at bay for about 2 days, enough time for the guild and the king to mobilize the army. The idea initially sounded absurd in such a serious meeting, and Mr. Peters reacted with disbelief. But Urk and her father stood by Art, confident that he could make it work. The complete trust Urk and Sir Ramon placed in Art forced Guildmaster Peters to reconsider his stance. With few other options, he reluctantly agreed to give Art's plan a chance, the only feasible one at that moment. Peters hesitated, asking Art if he was absolutely sure he could pull it off. His skepticism was understandable. He had never witnessed Art perform magic or accomplish any great feats before. Urk, ever protective of Art, swiftly defended him again. Peters apologized, explaining that he had no other way to ask for Art's help. Urk's father decided to send a message to the king, urging the mobilization of the army to combat the impending disaster. He placed his trust in Art, confident that the young genius would fulfill the plan and save the kingdom. The princess watched the scene with admiration, noting how the Uzfil family treated Art as one of their own. It was a beautiful sight to behold. Art, resolute and unwavering, was ready to defend the Isfil family, no matter the cost. After the decision was made, Guildmaster Peters concluded the meeting, declaring that everyone would reconvene in 2 days at the guild. That afternoon, Urk reflected on how Art had always stepped up to protect others. She thought about how he had given everything to protect her, yet she too had promised to protect Art. A twinge of sadness lingered as she realized she was always the one in need of help. This realization weighed heavily on her heart, but it only strengthened her resolve to stand by Art's side, supporting him through whatever challenges lay ahead. Art dived into researching ways to defeat the Black Batters. Finding a solution to something so elusive was no easy task, but by chance, he discovered 5 locusts in his own garden. The Ice Princess arrived early to check on his progress. The room was cluttered with research books, and locusts served as test subjects. She wondered aloud if Art had truly stayed up all night studying, and Art confirmed that he had, knowing the urgency of the situation. Concerned, Urk pleaded with him not to overwork himself, offering help with anything he needed. Art appreciated her offer, but didn't want to cause her more worry. He simply thanked her and continued his tireless research. After studying the insects, Art discovered that they were highly attracted to wheat, laced with enchanted poison. It was a valuable clue, but he had yet to find the perfect solution. As he pondered, a knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Neither Art nor Urk had expected visitors. Art opened the door to find Princess Leah standing there with a smile. He was startled, while Urk sighed, knowing exactly why Leah had come. A confrontation between the two princesses was inevitable. Without waiting for an invitation, Leah entered and greeted Urk playfully, though Urk was in no mood for pleasantries. Leah informed Art that she had come to help and brought gifts from them. They turned out to be her guards, carrying an assortment of heavy presents for Art. She insisted he accept them, explaining that her previous gifts had never reached him. This new batch, though smaller, was worth 5 million, consisting of gold and rare books. Leah clearly knew how to spoil someone, but she didn't stop there. She also brought the materials needed for Art's research. Urk thought Leah was going overboard, and showed no hesitation in expressing her displeasure. Leah remarked that even this bundle of gifts wasn't enough, and asked for Art's response to her proposal. So both Art and Urk were stunned, having no idea what proposal Leah was referring to. Leah appeared disappointed, accusing Art of misleading her, but Art maintained he had no clue what she meant. Then Leah dropped a bombshell. Art had never responded to her marriage proposal. Art was shocked, and Urk was furious. When had Leah proposed? Leah explained that ever since Art had saved her, she had felt the red thread of fate pulling them together. It was flattering, yet left Art speechless. Fortunately, Urk stepped in, blocking Leah's advances. She made it clear that Art was now part of her family, and the royal princess shouldn't force him. The tension between the women escalated, and Art, desperate to ease the situation, begged them to stop arguing. Leah asked if Art disliked her, and he could only stammer, unsure how to answer. Leah offered Art another gift, hoping it would win him over. This time, it was a book on magic explosions, allowing the user to trigger blasts around them. Art declined the gift, but Leah remained persistent, offering her assistance with anything he needed. Seizing the opportunity, Art pointed to the insects and asked Leah and Urk to observe them while he stepped out. It wasn't what Leah had expected, but she agreed. saying she could handle anything if she put her mind to it. Urk sighed, as usual, and asked where Art was going. The butler explained that he had business in the forest. Urk, uneasy about him going alone, especially with the queen batter nearby, offered to accompany him for protection. Art reassured her that he was only going to find some adventurers from the guild who could help. He didn't want the Ice Princess to be hurt, and without her guards, Leah would be unprotected. Art asked Urk to stay behind and watch over the princess while observing the insects. Urk hated always being the one left behind, and didn't hide her frustration at being asked to stay. However, in the end, she agreed to his request. To keep Leah happy, Art whispered that Urk should keep an eye on the Ice Princess and promised a reward afterward. Leah, well pleased, agreed to stay without hesitation. With everything settled, Art left the room and headed into the forest. Hours passed, and Art still hadn't returned. Leah and Urk tried to tolerate each other as they observed the locusts. Eventually, they fed the insects and realized they would devour anything in sight. Urk began to worry about Art's whereabouts. She had no idea where he was, or if he was safe. She also questioned whether she was being selfish, keeping Art under her family's protection. Did he have other goals? Princess Leah interrupted her thoughts, saying she felt like a loving wife, sending her brave husband off to battle. Urk rolled her eyes, wondering if Leah would ever stop with her fantasies. Annoyed, she asked if the embezzled gold had been dealt with yet. Leah confirmed that Art's former masters would likely be imprisoned for their crimes. She added that while such crimes usually led to execution, she had opted for imprisonment, thinking it would please Art more. Urk only wanted to ensure the criminals wouldn't escape justice. She asked if Art knew about this latest development. Leah replied that he didn't yet, noting Urk's eagerness to inform him. Leah reminded Urk that every woman needed patience. She said it was more the responsibility of gentlemen to make an impression. Urk realized Leah might have a fondness for giving unsolicited advice. Leah quickly changed the subject, deciding she might have offered a rival some valuable tips. She pulled out some gold she had previously given to Art and teased Urk, asking how she would feel if she received some as well. Urk grew suspicious, asking why Leah suddenly wanted to give her gold. Before they could discuss further, the locust began to glow. The strange light seemed to be a reaction to the gold, and both women wondered if they had stumbled upon something critical that could lead to victory against the swarm. Wenti Rubedo sat alone in confinement, awaiting the final decision on her father's fate. As she sat on her bed, her thoughts wandered back to Art, her former servant. Despite her father's wealth, it had never been about the gold. It was about Art's rejection. For the first time, Wenti realized that he no longer cared for her. This was a feeling she had never experienced before. Her mind returned to her childhood when she was tormented by others. Art had tried to comfort her, but she had only demanded he punish her bullies. In her youth, Wenti had been weak, arrogant, and cruel. She had always relied on Art's kindness, while he had treated her as family. Now remorse filled her heart as she remembered how she had repaid his goodness with cruelty. Her tears flowed as she whispered a silent apology, hoping wherever Art was, he would hear her plea. Outside her room, a loud commotion broke out. Wenti rose and peered through the door, sensing that her father's final judgment was at hand. Latze Rubedo, her father, had been arrested for treason and smuggling forbidden goods. Despite his arrest, he held firm to his belief that Princess Leah had orchestrated his downfall. As Wenti hesitated, someone approached her door. A man knocked, calling for Lady Wenti. When she confirmed her identity, the man revealed that he was from the neighboring kingdom of Barbarossa. He accused her father of smuggling beastfolk and elves, selling them as slaves. He also hinted that the Flamen family might be involved, and asked if she knew anything about it. Wenti recognized the Flamen name, and Flamen Dagger, the man her father had tried to marry her off to, flashed in her mind. Realization dawned on her. The marriage had been an attempt to secure an alliance. Wenti admitted she knew a little about the matter. The man informed her that he would have to take her with him. As they walked, Wenti's mind drifted. She wished she could apologize to Art before it was too late. In the forest, Art walked with his companions, his mind distant. When asked, he claimed everything was fine, but quickly changed the subject. Art and his companions were members of the Azure Sky Swords. Huey and Brad were the men in the group, and Thea was the only woman. Art complimented them, calling them reliable. Huey, full of arrogance, declared it was obvious just by looking at him. With their help, Art had been gathering information around the capital. Huey boasted that they were doing this because of his influence. Together, they had uncovered the growing threat of monster sightings. It seemed the Queen Batter's influence had stirred monsters into an aggressive frenzy, even affecting D-rank creatures. Huey barely noticed, still confident that no monster could defeat them. He turned his back on the forest, unaware of the danger closing in. Art and the others shouted, urging him to move, but Huey remained oblivious. Only when a giant bear charged at him did Huey realize the danger. The beast was too fast for him to dodge. With a quick flick of his wrist, Art cast the wind spell, Quick Steps, pulling Huey to safety just in time. Brad and Thea stood stunned, unable to follow Art's swift movements. As Art faced the giant bear, he saw that its reaction speed had improved drastically. The creature, once slow, had been transformed by the Queen Batter's influence. Art swiftly ended the battle with a quick draw, decapitating the bear in a single strike. Returning to the group, Art checked if everyone was all right. Just then, faint singing reached their ears from a distance. Art's suspicions were confirmed. It was the Black Batters. Leaving his companions behind, he rushed toward the capital. The timing had been miscalculated. The Black Batters would arrive in just 3 days instead of a week. The city's secret was becoming harder to keep as news of the catastrophe spread quickly. Soon, the capital's newspapers reported that Turquoise had been destroyed, and the creatures were advancing rapidly. Many nobles fled, fearing for their lives. The streets buzzed with whispers, and the people wondered what the king would do next. Many shared the same thought: escape the city before it was too late. Inside the royal palace, Prime Minister Cyrilla read the news with frustration. Despite their efforts to keep it secret, the information had leaked. People began to place their trust in the king, but Cyrilla raged at Minister Anil for allowing the news to escape. He demanded all newspapers be retrieved and the staff arrested. In a fit of fury, Cyrilla ordered the Daily News staff to be punished severely, even suggesting they lose their limbs. Before Minister Anil could act, King Drad intervened, overhearing the conversation. The king disagreed with Cyrilla's harsh treatment of the people. He reminded them that a kingdom was nothing without its citizens. Cyrilla and Anil tried to calm the king, urging him not to act in haste due to his worsening health. However, King Drad insisted on facing the reality of the situation. He understood the people's fear, and though his strength was fading, he vowed to protect the kingdom. Minister Anil reported that 3,000 soldiers could be mobilized, but only a third could defend the palace. The royal commanders were scattered. Only Royal Knight Commander Marcos was present. The king considered the greatest threat the Drad family had ever faced. Though weakened by illness, he swore to do whatever he could to save the kingdom. As his thoughts turned to his daughter, he asked where Princess Leia was. Minister Anil nervously reported that Leia had slipped away from the palace, taking with her precious ancient golden books. The king, knowing his daughter's stubbornness, was not surprised. Meanwhile, Art had returned to the city and reunited with Urk and Princess Leia. They watched in awe as the first locust began to glow. Leia confessed that she had fed the insects some gold, and when it began to glow, they added more. Both Leia and Urk apologized to Art, fearing they had disrupted his research, but Art was thrilled by the discovery, calling it an incredible breakthrough that could change history. Urk felt warmth in her heart, glad to have helped Art with something significant. She had always longed to contribute to his work. Relieved that Art had returned safely, she decided to show her concern for him. Remembering Leah's words about gentlemen being drawn to women who care, Urk decided to act. Without warning, she grabbed Art's arm and slapped him, shocking him completely. When Art asked why, Urk simply said she was overwhelmed with a joy after helping him. Meanwhile, Leah sat quietly, shedding a tear. She reached out to brush her hair, subtly drawing Art closer to her. Urk was left in shock, unable to grasp what had just occurred. Had Princess Leia deceived her with false guidance, only to act completely differently herself? A sudden knock interrupted their conversation. Tet entered, but his arrival was far from friendly. Tet urgently announced that Firin was under monster siege. He reported that creatures were attacking civilians in the streets. Without hesitation, Art cast his Quick Step spell and rushed outside, leaving Urk and the others behind. As Art arrived, the devastation was exactly as Tet had described. The city was in ruins and chaos reigned. He quickly rescued a civilian from a giant bird's claws, slashing it down with his sword. But this was only the beginning. Countless monsters roamed the city, empowered by the Queen Batter. Amid the chaos, Art spotted a familiar face, Pettis. He asked Pettis what he was doing in the middle of the battle, but there was no time for conversation. A massive monster suddenly lunged at Pettis from above. Fortunately, someone intercepted the attack with a perfectly timed throw. It wasn't Art who did it, so he turned to see who had come to the rescue. It was Royal Knight Commander Marcos, the strongest warrior everyone revered. Hope seemed to surge with his presence. Marcos's presence was overwhelming. To Art, he appeared an immovable force, towering above the battlefield like a giant. Art saw Marcos as superior in every way, a warrior far beyond his own capabilities. Firen was being devastated by locusts and monsters, and Pettis knew that Marcos was the one who could cleanse the city. The civilians had already been evacuated for their safety. Marcos mentioned that he had just dealt with an A-ranked monster near the kingdom's capital. Art tried to introduce himself, but Marcos wasn't interested. With a cold tone, he ordered Art and his team not to interfere. His green eyes burned with intensity. This was his domain, and he intended to command it. While his soldiers battled, Marcos stood still, chanting. He then plunged his sword into the ground, causing a massive earthquake that shattered the surroundings. The earthquake triggered a colossal explosion, obliterating the monsters in its wake. After the strike, two vast barren circles appeared on the ground. The force was so intense that Art and his team had to brace themselves against the shock wave. Art was stunned by Marcos's power, but couldn't help thinking that some warning would have been appreciated. The sheer danger of such a battle could have killed them all. Art shielded his eyes, determined to stand firm in the whirlwind. Marcos apologized, explaining that an earthquake was necessary to destabilize the enemies. Art realized that a typical earthquake wouldn't have destroyed monsters like that. Marcos's soldiers continued to fight valiantly in the capital. Meanwhile, a monstrous bear charged at one of Marcos's soldiers. Explosions and flashes filled the air until a massive fist emerged from the smoke. Marcos had once again shown his dominance, blocking the bear's attack with one hand and positioning himself as a shield for the soldier. He then slammed the bear's snout into the ground, creating a massive crater. With unyielding resolve, Marcos pressed on toward a new group of monsters, including giant ravens, radiating an intense energy. His sword slashed through them, reducing them to nothing but ashes. Yet the bear wasn't done. It charged again, fiercer than before. Marcos stood firm, facing the bear amidst explosions, continuing to fight. Art watched in awe, unable to look away from the display of strength. To Art, Marcos's power surpassed anyone he had ever known. Pettis remarked that Marcos was a ruthless, decisive warrior. He never stopped until all enemies were defeated. Marcos was the reason the capital remained safe from all threats, ensuring peace since joining the Royal Knights 15 years ago. Art marveled at Marcos's determination. He wished he could be even half as cool as him. He remembered the royal ball, where Urk's tearful face haunted him. He thought if he were as strong as Marcos, Urk would never have to cry again. Back in the present, the battle raged on, but Marcos stood his ground. He ordered everyone to fall back so he could handle the situation. Some of his soldiers noticed he was bleeding, but he waved them off, insisting he was fine. Art recalled Urk's encouraging words, and they filled him with renewed strength. He wanted to be a protector, not a burden. Art then cast a powerful combination of spells, Wash with Enchant, creating effects of Oxidize, Elasticity, and Lightweight, forming bubble prisons to contain the monsters. The soldiers around Art were stunned by his magic, realizing how effortlessly he wielded multiple spells. They speculated that he was a master in the field. Once the bubbles were set, Art snapped his fingers and said, "Let them pop." The bubbles vanished, but the extensive magic left Art drained. He collapsed to his knees, exhausted. One soldier rushed to his side, warning him not to overdo it, as a single spell would have sufficed. Finally, Marcos introduced himself by his first name, acknowledging Art's impressive magical skill. This surprised Marcos's soldiers, as he rarely remembered anyone's name, let alone praised them. Curious, they asked who Art really was, and Pettis casually remarked that Art was a genius. Marcos went further, bowing slightly to Art in a show of gratitude. Art, taken aback, humbly replied that it was nothing. However, this gesture clearly meant a great deal to Marcos, who appreciated Art's help. Seeing Marcos still upset about the lack of respect, Art quickly bowed in return, reintroducing himself as a servant of the Isfeel family. Just then, Tet rushed in, calling urgently for Art to come with him to the orphanage. It was about Princess Urk. At the orphanage, Urk was cornered by wild beasts, armed and ready for battle. As the monsters lunged at her, Urk swung her sword without hesitation, determined to protect the nuns and children. She reminded herself that she couldn't allow the monsters to reach them. While fighting, Urk thought of Art. His bond with her gave her strength, and the thought of him kept her going. She couldn't back down. She had to do her part, even from afar. Urk was determined to protect the orphanage. With fierce determination, Urk swung her sword and struck down a black wolf. As the fight raged on, dust and smoke filled the air. Urk, covered in dirt and breathing heavily, raised her sword once more. At a sudden movement, she thought it was another attack, but it turned out to be just a rock. However, 2 more black wolves appeared on either side, ready to strike. Urk was cornered, and as the wolves closed in, she braced for the worst. Just then, a flash of electricity surged through the air, and the wolves fell lifeless to the ground. Art had arrived in time to save her. Urk stood frozen, speechless. She realized she had been saved by Art once again. Feeling embarrassed, she apologized, blaming herself for needing help. Art dismissed her concerns, telling her she was injured and needed care. But Urk still felt the weight of guilt. Tet rushed over, expressing relief at her safety. However, Tet had urgent news. There was a crisis at the guild. Art and Urk rushed to the scene. At the guild, they encountered a wounded knight, bandaged but bleeding. The knight asked Art to clear the way. Art handed the knight a vial of his homemade remedy, explaining it might help. The knight asked about Art's identity, but Art simply replied he was a humble butler, here to help. Afterward, Art and Urk left the scene. The guild hall was bustling, filled with anxious faces as everyone gathered for urgent matters. Petas cleared his throat, silencing the room, and praised the work done so far before turning attention to Art. Art, standing beside him, introduced himself and began explaining his investigation, revealing that the Black Batter's invasion was moving faster than anticipated. According to his calculations, Furin would fall in just 3 days. The crowd panicked at the news, fearing they had no time to prepare. Without a plan, they would be sitting ducks. Chaos spread, and even the king's forces struggled to maintain order. Just then, Pettis slammed his fist against the wall, instantly quieting the hall. With fierce authority, he reminded them to focus, urging them to listen rather than panic. Art was taken aback by Pettis's commanding tone, but pressed on with his plan. He explained the rapidly approaching threat, and suggested using enchanted lemon water as an insect repellent to create a barrier against the monsters at the front lines. Some in the crowd were skeptical, unsure it would work. Art wasn't deterred, revealing a second part of his plan. He showed a sample of a black batter along with a magical ore, explaining that the beetle's shells would weaken when they consumed the ore, making it a crucial weapon against them. He emphasized that this idea came from Pettis, who advised eliminating part of the swarm with magical ore to prevent a full-on battle. The room fell silent, with Art unsure if they would accept his plan. Gradually, the crowd warmed to the idea, calling Art a genius for his strategy. Humble, Art credited Urk and Princess Leia, acknowledging that they were the real masterminds behind the plan. Urk blushed at the compliment. Pettis wrapped up the speech, warning the decisive battle was only 3 days away, urging everyone to prepare. He then spoke to Urk, reminding her that Art had always been by her side to support her. He promised to protect her no matter what happened in the battle. The sound of trumpets filled the air as the Royal Knight Commander and his troops appeared in grand procession, ready for their mission. One of the knights handed a flower to a sorrowful woman, perhaps offering her comfort. The commander led his army out of the city gates. Urk and Art stood at the old Gestal battle fortress. She admitted that the time had come, and Art agreed the great battle was set for the following day. She apologized, not meaning to drag him into this conflict. Art laughed, assuring her he wanted to be useful. To Urk's surprise, the orphans and nuns arrived with a gift, a charm they had made together, symbolizing their gratitude. Urk realized it was a token of thanks, meant to give her strength. Overcome with emotion, Urk hugged the children, promising to return to them after the battle. She assured them they would play and laugh together once more. Art watched with a warm smile as Urk interacted with the children. The moment was bittersweet, but they had to leave as the war council was about to begin. As the children departed, Art commented on their sweetness, To which Urk replied it was a miracle they still found joy despite the harshness of their lives. Art listened intently as Urk explained the tragic past of the children, losing families to disasters, enduring kidnapping, abuse, and monster attacks. She had taken it upon herself to ensure their safety and financial security. Art reassured her that the children would always remember her kindness. Urk, touched, turned the praise back to him, calling him a savior too. The War Council commenced with Commander Marcos, Pettis, Urk, and Art facing the council. A chart displayed the terrifying sight of 500 billion black batters heading toward them, with the Queen Batter at the center. Gestal Fortress would be their final defense. Teams were assigned. Urk led the scout division, Commander Marcos and Pettis headed the diversion unit, and Art took charge of the ambush team. The rear guard would protect the fortress. The strategy called for enchanted lemon water as the first line of defense, followed by a blend of flowers and magical ore to poison the swarm. As night fell, Art and Urk sat by a fire, seeking warmth. Art noticed that everyone seemed unusually joyful, and Urk explained it was because of Pettis. This could be their last night. Art remarked that Captain Fry seemed in a hurry. Urk assumed he was headed west with the cavalry. Even her father and Tet wouldn't retreat in the face of the upcoming battle. Art felt reassured, knowing that high-ranking adventurers stood with them. The Queen Batter was now their primary target, a terrifying S-rank threat unlike anything they'd ever faced. Art stood up and extended his hand to Urk, saying he had something special to show her. They walked into a field lit by the glow of crystal fireflies, drawn to the crystals on their shells. As they walked, Art admired the sparkling fireflies, likening them to stars in the night sky. He asked Urk if she thought it was beautiful. He then brought up her rearguard position, knowing they would fight in different locations. Urk urged him to be honest, and Art confessed he planned to face the Queen Batter alone, determined to destroy the threat. Urk asked if he truly intended to go through with it, regardless of the risk. Art nodded, saying she was his motivation to make sure the mission succeeded. As Art turned to leave, Urk grabbed his coat, causing him to stop and face her. She seemed to struggle with her words, so Art gently asked if she remembered their walk on the balcony, a day he would never forget. She had told him he was fine as he was, and that moment gave him a sense of purpose. He shared that his greatest wish was to be by her side, through both good and bad. To Art, a butler's duty was to serve their master, even at the cost of their life. As Urk began to cry, Art promised he would return when the time was right. He would come back to her side. As he walked away, Urk reflected on her feelings for Art, a flame burning deep inside her. Meanwhile, Art thought about his own feelings, hoping he could be the one to bring Urk happiness, even if it was just as her humble butler.